Hello, and welcome to another episode of my Singularity Let's Play. This is Northstar. Hope you folks are doing well. This will be a shorter video. Tired. Long of it's going to be trying to save some energy for doing other videos because I have to produce a ton to have any chance of getting my channel so I can monetize it to survive. With our horrendous society doing very little to support those who are disabled. And I'm not just talking about like Trump making things worse for a very long time. It's been a case of not taking actual care of the disabled. In the US, we only have a Social Security insurance, which you can't get till you're flat broke pretty much. So I'm not collecting that because I'm not flat broke yet. And because you get to that point, and then if they eliminate the program, then you're really screwed because you're not allowed to have any savings on it. And Social Security disability insurance, which they find a million ways to fuck you out of. In my case, because two of my jobs in the past didn't pay into payroll taxes because of these ridiculous exemptions they had in the 90s for university jobs while you're a student. So, I was in grad school, and I mean, it's ridiculous because if I hadn't been in grad school, I would have been working and earning payroll tax contributions. The same kind of work that got me payroll tax contributions after grad school, such as test grading, which I worked for a private industry and got payroll tax. But when I was in the university working as a TA, which was test grading plus office hours plus, various other support roles, important work necessary to make most large universities function. TAs are the backbone of a lot of education to a degree people don't realize. And especially graduate student TAs, they have a lot more responsibility than undergrads. And that didn't pay in. And then a different job, which was working, collecting, like ushering, which is definitely something that the people who were doing the same exact job but not students were getting payroll tax contributions. But because of that, you get fucked. It's not like it was an opt-out, opt-in. There was no way to get those contributions and earn Social Security disability insurance credits. And so, you can only earn a certain number of years, even though if there wasn't a limit how many credits you could in a year, obviously I would have earned so many later when I was working outside of grad school that I'd have the credits too. It's just, the years where you barely qualify for the credits, where you're early in your career and you're working for grad school, you get screwed. You get screwed out of the credits. It's an excuse to fuck over young people getting disabled. So, because let's say you only make $10,000 working while you're in grad school, that would get you a few work credits. I don't remember if that get you the full, but it would get you credits around the minimum number of dollars earned per credit. Then later, if you're making like $35,000 a year, you're way over the minimum amount to get full credits for the year. So a lot of money you're earning is not getting you extra credits. So you could earn the same amount of money distributed two different ways. If it's more even, but all of it counts, you'd get more credits. You can see how this is kind of manifestly unfair. And it's especially unfair, as I said, to people who spend time in graduate school and then get disabled young, which nobody's going to grad school. I can maybe see there being people who don't even bother going to college, who want to game the system or something, but nobody's going to graduate schools anticipating becoming disabled. He's hoping for that or anything, these are ambitious, hardworking, some of the smartest people on earth. And I was among the smarter, even among other graduate students very often. I had professors comment on how brilliant I was, and also my poor social skills. So, not actually poor social skills, but I don't test high on agreeableness. I test middle of the range on agreeableness tests, and most people score high, which is to say I'm willing to tell people when they're wrong. It's sometimes a useful trait in academia once you get to the higher ranks, but when you're starting out, it can be tough. especially if you have professors who are outright wrong about something, and sometimes they were. I wasn't afraid to tell them and come with complete proofs of things. Like, could be as simple as a professor not doing statistics correctly in a test. Let me give you guys a question. You should immediately recognize the right answer. If something increases by 100%, it doubles, correct? That's easy. Now, if it increases by 300%, it quadruples. So if you have a calculation, the correct answer is something increases to 4 times its original value, you would say it increases by 300%. You would not say it increases by 400% because that would be to quintuple the value. So if somebody presented a multiple choice answer and increased by 300%, 400% from both answers, and the correct value was something with quadruple, you would say it increases by 300%. This was from some physiology equations, and that exact scenario came up, and a professor refused to admit that they had misused the percentages. They acknowledged the correct value should be 4 times the original value for something, and yeah. I mean, that was one of the simpler and more obvious, but it can get much more complicated than that. We're talking, advanced molecular biology type stuff. That's something I think anyone listening to this can understand. So I wasn't afraid to tell professors they're wrong. Stand up for myself, and that could be whatever. But I'm saying that to not sound like I'm just tooting my own horn, but I was very smart. Even my professor's knowledge is very hardworking, very ambitious. Everyone who knew me agreed on that. And then I got disabled at the age of 31, not quite 32, from long COVID. If that hadn't happened to me at this point, I'd be between third and fourth years of medical school, or maybe having just finished a fourth year, depending on if there would be a gap after my special masters, which I was assuming, because I'm a pessimist, that there would have been a 1-year gap, because my research was going kind of slow due to the pandemic. Hey, like a world where there was no pandemic, my research would have been completed on time, and I definitely would have. My efforts to get my research requirements, I actually had a project kind of fall apart because of lack of good communication from the professor I was working for. So, he wanted super regular updates, but he wrote these really short emails that didn't make that clear, and in fact said hardly anything. It was terrible communicating by email. I mean, that's the thing with older generations. Like, I've never seen a young person who's bad at communicating by email the way some of these 50-something-year-old people are. Even a surgeon, it was like a 54-year-old surgeon. The guy just couldn't communicate by email well. If I'd been doing research with him in person, as the original intention had been before the pandemic hit, I would have had no problem getting the necessary stuff. I was doing statistical analysis of some surgical outcomes, which is a fairly simple type of project, but he wanted a lot of updates on how the analysis was going, and more than just the very simple ones that he apparently was giving by email. Responses, very simple questions. Something could have easily been worked out with in-person communication. And surgeons are very proud, so there's no real. They decide something doesn't go in the way they want. There's no recovering from that because their egos are the size of planets, especially like this guy was a heart surgeon, which is what I wanted to do someday. Not that I didn't know this. I shadowed a surgeon once. He warned me surgeons have gigantic egos. Most of them. He was the exception. The guy exception. He was the exception. Exception. Yeah, different words. With my long COVID, I don't get words right all the time anymore. But he was the exception to this rule. But he warned me most surgeons aren't like him. And the guy shadowed, who inspired me to want to become a surgeon someday. And that there are a lot of huge egos, and I was prepared for that, in my research and elsewhere. I knew I was going to have to deal with these planet-sized egos. I would have been the rare thing, a surgeon with a modest-sized ego. Maybe some of you listening to me now would disagree with this, but anyone who's known me has said I'm pretty humble. And he's known me well, except for a few dick family members who always beat me down, and my mother, among other people. Shall we say, I have a huge ego, but she's constantly putting me down and abusive, and so that's people want to beat you down or say you have a big ego if you stand up for yourself. But probably my father too, because he was also abusive and constantly putting me and my brother down. But most people have known me. All my peers and my professors said I was very humble, maybe too humble. Well, not maybe. They quite distinctly said I was too humble at times. I need to be a little more arrogant. I got that precise criticism on multiple occasions. Hope I didn't take it too much to heart now, after the fact. It's no longer useful, but anyhow. Yeah, so being cheated out of Social Security disability insurance because it's all or nothing, and government's like, you 2 work credit shy, and it actually should be only 1 work credit. There's this whole finicky bit with the job I started and when the first paycheck came in, but it doesn't matter. It's not worth fighting because it's still a work credit shy, and there's legitimately am 1 work credit shy because the rules being set in a way that such a way as to cheat me out of work credits, like 2 or 3 that I should have had. If these jobs had paid into payroll tax. But Newt Gingrich helped to add the rule in the 90s that fucked people out of that. And, in a healthy, functioning democracy, problems like this would get resolved quickly. People complain the system or the rules didn't work as in a way that was fair or as intended, and they'd be fixed. But we don't have a democracy in the United States and haven't for a very long time. We have an oligarchy. The only opinions that matter are the opinions of the richest 10%, and mostly the richest 0.1%. The billionaires and the multimillionaires. Billionaires are actually like 0.005%. They're a tiny group, and yet they hold so much of the political power in the country. It's not at all mysterious how they make giant campaign donations and they put money into super PACs and buy political ad campaigns for politicians who do their bidding. And so, I mean, you'll hear like communists will have this model of like bourgeois democracy. At the top will be the capitalist class, in the middle will be the party bureaucrats, and the bottom the voters. And that's pretty accurate. I am not a communist. I am a Marxist, but not a communist. But I am not afraid to borrow things that they've got correct. And this party of how they call it bourgeois democracy, but really they're talking about oligarchy. A lot of them be like, there's never been real democracy in capitalist countries. Maybe. There's some evidence that the republics of, and some assholes like, we don't have a democracy. We never had a democracy. We have a constitutional republic. No, constitutional republic is the form of government. Okay? Democracy refers to a republic that serves the interests of the people, that's egalitarian and equitable. A government of, by, and for the people is a democracy. It doesn't matter if it's a constitutional republic or a direct democracy. Those are both forms of democracy if they function correctly. If only the interests of the rich are represented, it's an oligarchy. But, don't expect MAGATARs or whoever to have a solid political understanding, or even many Bernie bros or any number of people. There's so many idiots who don't have any understanding of political theory. They don't bother to educate themselves. They think their views or instincts or just biases are automatically correct. Because there's a plague of arrogance in U.S. society, I think. The best explanation for that is Americans have been told so long that they're the best people in the world and their country is the best country in the world that there's an incapability to accept being wrong. But anything political. And the U.S. winning the Cold War was terrible for this because you get so many dumbasses think it proved our system was the best. The U.S. didn't really win the Cold War. It failed to lose first, is a better way of putting it. It simply didn't lose the Cold War first. The U.S. was already headed towards collapse before the end of the Cold War. Like, we're seeing the collapse start to occur now, slowly. But the US was already headed this way. The Soviets were just headed there faster, that's all. Both systems were unstable and going to collapse. Just who collapsed first, that's what the Cold War were in. There was a lot of luck involved, honestly. Could have happened differently, although the odds were strongly in favor of the Soviets collapsing first, and this was partly because they were a one-party democracy. A one-party state, not really a democracy at that point, a one-party republic. But I just explained how the difference between republic and democracy, and republic is the form of government. Their form of government actually was republican in that they had elected representatives that were selected at mass meetings, which are basically party nominations, and then the general election was a yes/no on those representatives who were nominated. If you were going to start off with the assumption that your system was going to be one party and you were to design a republic within that, then you would get something like the Soviet Union. It was a republic, but it was not a functional republic. It was a republic that was co-opted by the party elites. But they weren't living lives of luxury or whatever crap people try and claim at the expense of the masses. In fact, the level of income equality, and there was income inequality, it was not everyone has the same. People who say that are dipshits who don't know their history. The basic motto of the lower stage of socialism, which is what the Soviet Union had and never claimed to have anything different, is to each according to their work. That is, workers get paid based on the work they do. There are no bosses who exploit the workers. But there still is inequality in income. It's just less. But the level of income and wealth inequality and standards of living was the second lowest in the world. Not the lowest in the world, which is what it should have been if it was a functional socialist country. Truly functional, not somewhat co-opted. The most highest level of equality on earth, actually that went to Sweden at the time as the most equal country, which Sweden has a really weird place in the Cold War. For a while, they almost reformed themselves into a socialist country, but at the same time, they had the Central Bank of Sweden, which was incredibly reactionary and created the fake, air quote, Nobel Prize in economics. It's not a real Nobel Prize. There was even a lawsuit over this, and they pushed reactionary economists. So you have the people of Sweden and the political parties moving politics so far left that they were accused of trying to willingly bring the country behind the Iron Curtain, which, I mean, they were going to be like Yugoslavia, a neutral socialist country, if things had continued until they saw the Soviet Union was going to collapse, and then was on the path to collapse, and they backed off of that. But Sweden was reforming towards becoming a neutral socialist country. But their central bank hated that, worked against that every opportunity, and even created a fake Nobel Prize just to push right-wing economics around the world and in Sweden. The Swedish central bank created originally, supposedly, they'll sometimes call it as a PR stunt or publicity stunt, but it was really about co-opting the field of economics and skewing what sort of people were considered most prominent and credible. Because if you say, I have a Nobel Prize in economics, everyone listens to you. But there's no such thing as a Nobel Prize in economics. There isn't. It's the Nobel Memorial Prize, and it was created by the Swedish Central Bank, and it's not subject to the same criteria of selection, the same stringency, the same difficulty in obtaining it, or fairness as like the Nobel Prize in chemistry or physics or medicine. It's determined by secretive, wealthy Swedish central bankers. And I have to emphasize wealthy. I actually even know someone. I know someone in the U.S. Central Bank, the U.S. Federal Reserve, and they're always talking about how lovely this person is. This person lives a life of utter luxury and was like from a multimillionaire background. And that all the central bankers are. They're from the wealthiest families. They don't really get there by their merit. They love to believe they're there because they're so smart. And they are smart people usually, but they are smart people from very wealthy backgrounds who represent their class interests in the central banks. Poor kids who just were really good at economics are never allowed to become like top central bankers. They might be like a deputy to, but they never make it to the top. There's definite classism in it. And yeah, so wealthy, privileged, born into privileged Swedish central bankers from, families collected old Swedish landed aristocracy from feudal times. I'm not kidding you. They're the bastards who secretly like meet in a back room and decide who's going to get the Nobel Prize in economics because it's not a real Nobel Prize. We should stop calling it that. We should call it the Swiss Central Bank Prize in Economics. That would be an accurate name. And I don't think anyone would object to that except the bastards who want to claim it's Nobel Prize because it's been given to bricks like Milton Friedman, who is a racist piece of shit. Anyways, enough. I'm gonna go do rest for a second and do other videos. So I wish you all the best, viewers. Take care of each other. Be kind to yourselves. And may always find a guiding star to lead you home. Adieu. And best luck.